see you in New York shortly.
Yes. Yeah, I got here last night.
Oh, you're in New York already. Okay.
Yes, I am. Yeah. How are you?
Yeah, very good, thanks.
You're still in Madrid?
Yeah, traveling tomorrow morning.
Okay.
Yeah. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. We are expecting about between 40 and 50 people to join today, though some will be joining at slightly later stages. So as we have almost 20, let's just maybe wait a minute, and then I think we can get started.
Hope everybody's week is off to a good start.
Yes, talking about nature on a Monday, so what could be better than that? Right. Okay, so we're at 22. I think that's good enough to kick this off. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining today. Thank you also so much to so many people for having filled in a fairly extensive feedback form that has been very enlightening for us as a process to go through that. And that's what we aim to use today's meeting to go through. We've taken some time to kind of digest all of these findings. Elena, if you could pass just to the next slide, please. And hopefully then to have some, we'd like to have as interactive a session as possible. We've got quite a bit to go through. And well, so basically here, we will start again with the workshop objectives. Then give a brief reminder of the Nature Positive Tourism Partnership itself before launching into these 3 chunks that form the basis of the survey form that you all filled in. The first one is mitigating risk and impact. We'll give that 30 minutes. We'll then look at realizing nature positive tourism, which is basically, in a sense, the micro level. So what is it that businesses can do to comply with their obligations and to transform their operations into nature positive operations. And then the last section is exploring the potential for travel and tourism to become
esto ya lo sé como digo, en plan, lo sé todo, pero
I think someone, yeah, all right, there we go. So it is the macro level, and that is more what the sector overall can do, and ideally what us as a partnership can do as well. That's finding our role in this as well, to really try to position our sector as a guardian of nature. This is what we'd like to achieve over the medium to long run. And again, as mentioned, we hope to have this as interactive as possible, so do feel free to interrupt, to raise points whenever you like. With that, I will pass over to Claire from SHA for the objectives.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, so to give you a bit of an overview of the objectives of the initiative, the Nature Positive Travel and Tourism, our objective is really to realise nature positive tourism, recognising that this involves both minimising harm to biodiversity and building back nature. And through our individual and collective actions, what we're really aiming to do is to support the travel and tourism industry to minimise or avoid any harm, to ensure that it fulfills its obligations to halt and reverse biodiversity loss, to harness travel and tourism's ability to really build back better and biodiversity and help to regenerate tourism destinations, to take a proactive role by supporting local and national priorities for nature, to support local livelihoods and involve local and Indigenous communities when making decisions, and to transform travel and tourism to foster a shift towards a more mindful and sustainable travel practices. And one of the points that I just wanted to pick up on from this list is the point around Indigenous communities. We had a lot of discussion about this on the last call that we had as a group, so thank you very much for the feedback. following that, we have engaged and encouraged more involvement of various Indigenous peoples representatives, and we've invited numerous of them to participate in the initiative. So thank you for that, and we will continue to make sure that they are involved. So those are the overall objectives of the initiative, and with that I'd like to hand over to Dirk to share a bit more.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you, Chris, very much for the opportunity also from UNWTO to welcome everybody here today. My name is Dirk Leser, and I'm with Sofia Gutierrez. We are leading from UNWTO's side the partnership, and we are very happy that these three organizations came together last year at the CBD to form this nature positive partnership, UNWTO, SHA, and WTTC, to reflect the leadership of the sector, both public and private sector, and also to echo some of the activities the organizations were doing separately already before in this joint initiative. The sector is facing many challenges now after the pandemic. The transition which is needed in the tourism sector was expressed during the pandemic as an absolute need. But we also see right now during this recovery phase that the constant reminder is necessary. At the same time, we see huge opportunities because tourism, like no other economic sector, has this possibility to act as an agent of change if well managed. And that is what the partnership is about. So leadership, support through guidance and tools, which we are jointly developing with the help of Ánimo Mundial. And in the consultation process, which is taking place here today, with industry and non-industry experts on biodiversity, we hope to complement also the information process which took place. We conducted among all UNWTO member states a consultation process leading also into this initiative, collecting best practices and inputs from member states authorities to support the action of all of us. So through that, we hope to compile the right joint report, strategic guidance, which is to be presented and to the General Assembly taking place in a few weeks in Uzbekistan, and marking through that also from the way how UNWTO can do that on the agenda of member states, the importance of this partnership. With that, I hand over to Daniel from Ánimo Mundial.
Thank you, Dirk. I'm Daniel Turner from Ánimo Mundial. Before we begin, I just wanted to thank everybody for their contributions so far, not just from participating in this workshop, but also the many people that were involved in the consultation, providing of case studies and so on. And as Dirk, Claire and Chris have alluded to, is that all of this information will be consolidated and analysed and incorporated into a final document to really identify how we realise nature positive tourism. So as far as the So as far as the consultation is concerned, in addition to the national member states that Dirk just mentioned, we had 50 participants in all, and you can see in front of you how those are divided up, almost split between civil society and the private sector. And then we also had a number of experts representing intergovernment organizations such as the World Economic Forum and UNEP, academics, experts in biodiversity measurement such as eDNA, and then specialists in tour guides and indigenous peoples. All of the data that you will see on the slides when we're presenting the results refer to a mean average of all participants' feedback. And within this presentation, within this workshop, we will be collecting other thoughts, ideas, and feedback to incorporate in the process. So please don't be shy as far as sharing your thoughts. We can start now session 1, and I pass back to Claire.
Great, thanks, Daniel. Yes, so the first session is all about mitigating nature-related risks and impacts. And this session is really about considering the priority actions of individual businesses as they seek to identify dependencies on nature, which become business risks if nature continues to decline. So followed by the assessment of direct and indirect operational impacts that may be driving biodiversity loss and degrading nature. Undertaking these actions will fulfill part of the obligations of a business to halt biodiversity loss as recommended by the Global Nature Goals. So throughout the process, consultees were asked to rank a variety of aspects of nature, indicating which they considered to be the most important for travel and tourism to tackle, both from the perspective of travel and tourism's dependencies on nature, as well as its operational impact. And Daniel will now talk through those findings and the interpretation that we've taken from them.
Thanks, Claire. So in front of you, you should see a graph. The blue lines represent the total feedback received, and as I said, these are the mean totals of all participants. The orange represent those contributors who associated themselves with the travel and tourism sector, and the silver or grey bar represents everybody else. So you can see that the most critical dependency, and as you can see, all of the options would be considered relevant to travel and tourism, but as you will remember, those that participated in the consultation, you were asked to identify the top 3 dependencies that were most critical for travel and tourism. And functioning healthy ecosystems was considered the most crucial dependency, whilst the least considered dependency was protected and other conserved areas. And also important to highlight, I think, was that there was a slight discrepancy over how those consultees that affiliated themselves with the industry felt that it was that unique and distinctive natural habitats were of greater importance than high biodiversity value areas. Recognizing that ultimately it's important for these areas to be high biodiverse rather than be unique and distinctive. Does anyone have any comments on that before I move on to the additional feedback from this section on dependencies? So as far as the additional feedback is concerned, the overriding feedback was that consultees felt that nature should be considered in general and not the specific elements of it. And as the diagram in front of you presents, this is from the Stockholm Resilience Institute, and it's known as the wedding cake because of the its tiers. But you can see that the 17 Sustainable Development Goals have been arranged in a different style than the usual series, and instead has the biosphere SDGs, so that's 13, 14, 15, and 6 along the bottom, representing biosphere, and then the society SDGs, then the economy, and then partnerships of the goals at the top. This, we feel, is a much better way of considering the SDGs, where the importance of the biosphere basically establishes everything else. So you can't really focus on society or economy without first ensuring that the biosphere is intact and healthy. And so as far as the general consensus is that we must consider sustainability in a connective way and not treating the individual targets in silo. And this is definitely consistent with the nature positive partnership and the nature positive approach that we have been presenting as part of this engagement. Did anyone have anything else that they wanted to add in relation to dependencies? So travel and tourism's dependencies on nature. I'll move on. So we also looked at the impacts, and these are the negative impacts. And we listed 10 potential impacts that travel and tourism have on biodiversity and nature. And we asked the consultees to indicate which of those listed impacts were of the most important, the top 3 most important. And as you can see from the graph, and as you can see from the notes to the side, is that pollution was considered the most significant impact, followed by habitat encroachment, degradation, fragmentation, and destruction. Invasive species or invasive alien species was the least considered impact. And something like the impacts that are high up the list as far as global drivers of biodiversity loss, over-harvesting of natural resources, and the supply chain were considered minimal impacts as far as the feedback was concerned. Did anyone have any comments that they wanted to share in relation to this graph or the impacts? Okay, move on. So as far as the wider feedback, because as you'll remember, as well as asking to rank the impacts, those 10 impacts, we also provided opportunity for the consultees to share their wider thoughts on the topic, is that we collected that additional information. So in relation to impacts, many of the consultees felt that animal welfare was another impact of concern that was not originally listed on those 10 impacts. And obviously this concerns the individual animal and whether that animal is in the wild, in a captive environment, or used to carry people or loads, that those animals are kept in appropriate living conditions and its welfare needs are met. In addition to that, obviously pollution was considered the highest ranking impact, but we did not dissect pollution into its many different forms. So one thing we would like to understand from the consultees to help us formulate the project that will be as a result of this process, what we'd like to invite is for people to share their thoughts as to why they selected pollution as the top driver in this case, or the top impact, and which type of pollution they felt was of most significance. We recognize that impacts do vary by location and activity, but of course we're looking at this from a general holistic perspective. And the other 2 issues that were very much highlighted were climate change and habitat impact as far as tourism activities are concerned. And just framing here that those three, climate change, habitat impact or biodiversity loss, and pollution, are recognized as the triple planetary crisis, the diagram you see in front of you. So could I invite, if somebody wanted to go first, just to reflect on the fact that pollution was high up the agenda as far as those impacts were concerned. Did anyone have anything to add?
Has his hand up.
Yeah. Hi. Yes. So I really think it's a matter of perception. I think pollution is something that for most of us is the most evident and easier to understand. I think for most of us who live in cities, pollution is something that we've lived with, and it's easier to understand than biodiversity loss and other issues. So I'm guessing that is the reason why many people put it higher up. I think it's just a perception issue and a matter of understanding it better, not necessarily that it's more important. So that would be my thought.
Thanks, Javier. Anyone else wanted to reflect on that?
We have from Chrissy and from Megan. We'll start with Chrissy.
Hi, I mean, I think from my perspective, we can't get away from the fact that aviation is so tied up in all of this. So can't obviously answer for everyone in terms of what pollution means as a definition, but I think for me that would come out as a key driver in that.
Thanks. Daniel, did you have any?
I think you're muted, Daniel.
Sorry, I can't see everybody's screens. So Claire, do you think you could filter those who have their hands up, please?
Megan has her hand up.
Yeah, just adding to this, and I think also the other listing, right? I think two things. One is a function of maybe a real signal, but also another is a function of how similar vocabulary might be in the general day-to-day. For example, even things like protected areas are, in so many ways precursors to functioning healthy ecosystems, but it might just be a vocabulary that might lead towards the ranking of these lists. But I think in the case of pollution, it's also one of the most globally consistently applied, visually identifiable impacts on a business, whether you're staring out at a beach and seeing microplastics, or whether you're in an urban area and experiencing air pollution, or whether you're in aviation, or whether you're being regulated as a result of it. It probably is one of the reasons why that comes up top of the list.
Thank you. Did anyone else have
no other hands at the moment?
Okay, we will carry on then.
We do have from Daniela.
Daniela?
Yes, thank you so much. My camera is not working now, but in relation to what Javier also mentioned, and Megan as well, it's true that we can see pollution as one important one. I am a little concerned that invasive species is the one with the lower valuation there, because other specific ecosystems, this is actually devastating. And I think that tourism is sometimes a little bit responsible of this. So I don't know if there is a way in which we can explain maybe, or perhaps that. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm very glad you made that point.
And we also have from Anna.
Yes, hello everyone, and I apologize for being a few minutes late. Yeah, my question is the purpose of needing to prioritize these, because my sense is that we're looking at positive impacts globally, but the actual impact itself and the cause of the impact is going to vary significantly. So in some cases, obviously in urban areas, they may not be as aware of biodiversity loss as someone living on the edge of the Amazon or something. So yeah, what was the purpose of, Daniel, if you can explain, what are you trying to get at here? What is the overall sense of concern? Or
Yes, I mean these challenges and the processes were the questions asked were very much based on some previous consultations we had with the different companies within the sector. And I think it's fair to say that they are overwhelmed with all the different issues they have to consider. And we felt that this consultation presented an opportunity to identify what experts felt were the priority actions as far as identifying and addressing the dependencies and impacts in relation to travel and tourism, recognizing that a lot of the travel businesses don't even have one person. It's like half a person or a quarter of a person focusing on sustainability. So it's sort of really seeing how we can take those 5 drivers of biodiversity loss and identify which the travel businesses should be considering as a priority in their action agenda.
Thank you.
But before we hand over to Megan, and I think that all of this kind of leads up to what we hope is a building crescendo towards the final segment, where we're thinking, well, what with all of this information, what can we reasonably do? So it's to foster a bit of that discussion, to get these thoughts out there, and we start to organize them, and then we start to form a plan. Megan?
I just want to really kind of emphasize, I think Anna's question is really relevant, right? Because it is something that if you're detecting to see where understanding or comprehension is kind of falling out in the various private sector, non-private sector actors, I think this is a super helpful component. But when you're actually kind of getting into the contributions of the sector towards any of these specific challenges, contribution to invasive species might be really difficult and various phases away in terms of the overall impact to the ecosystem, or to demonstrate causality and contribution of specific industries to these kinds of things. We even have programs that focus on invasive species, and we find it really hard to gain a lot of traction around that, just because a lot of folks just don't understand the connection between invasive species and tourism. And so it gets binned under Iberostar is doing something nice to help the ecosystems, not because it's driving a core part of its business itself. Whereas if we speak towards pollution, it's a lot more clear to gain traction around this is an impact that has reason for us to work on some of these issues. So I do think these are really big signals of demonstrating perhaps general comprehension, but not necessarily kind of actual impacts on ecosystems or contributions towards.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Megan, and it gives us a food for thought in relation to the documentation that we'll be producing as a result of this. And I think following the IPS report on invasive species, I think it presents an opportunity for us to really explain what that is, and also in the context of travel and tourism within this documentation. So thank you. Did anyone else have a comment before I pass back to Claire?
Yeah, I just this is an interesting element here on the invasive species. I wasn't aware of any particular association of tourism encouraging invasive species and being a big problem in that regard. So I just wonder if somebody with some expertise in that area can just say a few words on it, the extent to which it is a problem compared to these other areas that we've been looking at, or thereabouts. Thanks.
I think David has something to share on this.
Hi there, thanks, Chris. Yeah, I'm not an expert on this, but I did just look at it quickly. There does seem to be some sort of scientific work on this from 2015. Just to pick one sentence out of the abstract, our results provide quantitative evidence that the abundance and richness of non-native species are significantly higher in sites where tourist activities take place than in control sites. I think it's very hard to trace the origin of invasive species often once they're in an environment, so it's quite difficult to gather the sort of detailed data that you'd like, but there definitely seems to be stuff pointing in the direction that tourism can contribute to this.
Thanks. So invasive species jumping up as an area of interest here. And Daniela, you have your hand up again.
Thank you so much. As I introduced part of the topic, I think that we have, so it's hard to disentangle that is because of tourism. Just we cannot say it's because of tourism that we are having more invasive species at one destination or another. However, human use in general could cause this. I just put the name of the paper related to the Antarctic, for example, because besides science, tourism is the second most important human activity, and invasive species is a problem there in an ecosystem like this one. So I think that could be one example, for example, of a fragile ecosystem in which invasive species, because of human use, but considering that tourism is one important use, could be an example for this. Thank you.
Thanks, Daniela. I think that this is all good stuff for us to digest. Oh, Miles, we've got another hand.
Hi, I just thought I might give a little bit of an example. More, I guess it's the as well as the invasive species issue and the transport. And there is quite a lot of work being done by a number of kind of activity bodies that promote a certain type of tourism, educating their kind of, so particularly for marine and freshwater invasives, some of the kind of paddle sports and the operators working in, freshwater and marine environments are endeavoring to educate their clients. And as well as the invasive issue, there's also the transport of disease. So when I was guiding in Antarctica and I was leading sea kayak tours where we were camping on the ice, I would have to clean the kayaks and clean the client's footwear and everything before if we camped anywhere near a penguin colony, there was a chance we could transfer disease from one colony to another. So, as well as the invasive species, there's also the disease transfer that's an issue here.
Thanks. And with us having our summit in Rwanda in a month, that's also a key concern when visitors meet the gorillas. So, all right, this is emerging as quite an interesting impact that people are raising. But in the interest of time, Daniel, I as a timekeeper, perhaps we should move on to the next section.
Thank you. Okay. Brilliant, thank you. Yes, so throughout the workshop, we want to make sure that we hear as much from all of you. And as part of that, we've invited some industry and non-industry representatives to help us to consider the wider practical implementations of integrating a nature-positive tourism approach into what we're doing. So we have a couple of people that will be speaking on this within this first section. We have James Duquette, who's General Manager of Grasshopper Adventures, which is part of the Discover Group. And we have Dr. Megan Morikawa, who's Global Sustainability Director at Iberostar. We were also due to be hearing from Lyndon Coppell, but unfortunately she's had to send her apologies, but I'm sure we will look to share some stuff on that with you after the call. So each of these, James and Megan, will each inform us on how their businesses have approached the topic of nature protection, and will be sharing some advice with us, I'm sure, in terms of what we can look to do as part of this project. So I would like to hand over to James Duquette to start with, please. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Sure, absolutely. So Linda's not here. Do I get like 2.5 extra minutes? Do I get a little? My time limit was quite short when I signed up. Hi everybody. I'm James. I'm with Discover and Grasshopper Adventures, sister brand. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about sort of where we used to be, kind of how we got here, and what we're trying to do to sort of move in a positive direction. So as some background, we are a DMC, one of the leading DMCs in Asia and Central America. We are operating across 14 destinations, so quite a big footprint. I think we've got about 2,000 staff. We run, I probably shouldn't even count the number of transfers, airport transfers that we do, but we are and always have been a DMC with passion. That passion for us has been in different areas. So like Daniel mentioned earlier, around a half a head count or a quarter head count, looking after sustainability, we've always had our sustainability efforts have been driven by individuals in our business with a particular passion to get things done or around a particular cause. So that's what we found was the most effective. I think some companies do have, full-time sustainability staff, but we've had ours that's sort of just driven by an individual who's passionate about a topic and excited to share about that topic and kind of lead the charge around that. We do have an internal working group that has sort of taken over this topic or these topics. We have broken it into 3 different pillars led by a different member of the company. So we look after society, nature, and the economy. And that's kind of how we sort of break it down. I'm the animals guy here. I've learned a lot from Daniel and many others here. So yeah, so that's kind of our background, where we're coming from. And a DMC, for those that don't know, is a ground handler. We do transfers, tours, hotel bookings, that sort of thing. So we took a shift, changed direction back in late 2021. We started on this very exciting journey with Nature Impact. Daniel and Helen from Anima Mondiale reached out with this idea that they had been cooking up, and it was the perfect situation for us. So we had previously been Travel Life partners. We'd partnered with some other organizations, but we were looking to sort of get ourselves a bit more organized. So like I said earlier, we were really driven around just the passion, where, we had a guy that was really interested in getting rid of water bottles. So we managed to do a pretty good job of getting rid of single-use plastics. And, that took all sorts of work. And looking at how we can eliminate that was a huge project, but it was really just one sort of thing. So we weren't really working with a particular strategy or direction. We wanted to do good things. We wanted to, have a positive impact, but we weren't, all we had really to sort of support us with that was, the individuals that were interested in these topics. So we started with Nature Impact in late 2021. As founding members, and kind of the idea here was that we're not just looking for a stamp that we can put on our website to tell customers that we care about the earth. It was really to make a tool and create something that will have a positive impact, and that is understandable across destinations, across businesses, and can sort of funnel that energy and that give us a bit more guidance for our goals. So it was something that, starting from that project, we involved all of our stakeholders. And when I say stakeholders, as a DMC, we have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of stakeholders, right? So it's not just us in the office. We've got drivers, we've got tour guides who are working with our customers. We've got hotel partners. We've got other local tour operators. So involving all of them in sort of this project to make a tool that is useful and helpful. I think somebody mentioned earlier about communication. Communicating across one language is difficult enough. Like, I use invasive species as a great example. I hate to say it, but that would be really tough for me to then translate out to all of my destinations and then have them translate out to their suppliers. Or to their network. So I think maybe it's just a marketing issue around why is that a lower priority? Just thought it is a struggle. We came across many unexpected things. So we implemented Nature Impact, went through the assessment, and there were a lot of things that sort of surprised us. Even I was involved in the creation of the, of the assessments and the working book and the scoring and the metrics and all that. You come across a lot of things that you don't really expect when you're doing something so thorough and resource appropriately, for sure. We just had, myself and then, our various different teams. We had hotel assessments involved in this, and making sure that everybody is on board. The organization is really important to move in a positive direction if you want to have the outcome that you're hoping for. So in terms of output, I would say be realistic with action plans. I think this is something, learning from our recent experiences, it's really important that you be realistic with what you can achieve with the resources that you've got. I mean, we as tourism businesses took a real beating during COVID. We're still recovering. Our suppliers are still recovering. So sometimes expecting a 36-hour turnaround time on a questionnaire or feedback or ideas and plans and strategies is just maybe not the most realistic thing. So I encourage everyone, other businesses, to sort of be very upfront with what they hope to achieve and how they're going to do it. And communicate frequently and thoroughly. So this is something, like I mentioned the stakeholders earlier, a big lesson for us has been, you can't just send an announcement. I'll use an example of our wildlife policy, our animals policy, Daniel. They're animals. They're not all wildlife because they're not all wild, I've learned. We adopted this policy and put it in place, and it meant what practices we would do, what we wouldn't do, what the message was with our suppliers, around, some controversial practices and where the industry is going. And, I've sent out emails, we've hosted calls, but you can't stop reminding people enough. I think there's, if you really want something to sink in through what is such a deep supply chain and across so many different languages and so many different technological barriers. We work in some really rural areas, so you can't just send an email and click forward and expect that that's going to really achieve anything. You really have to think, I've got to get across languages and economic barriers and technology barriers to make sure that people are well understanding, not just the goal, but what is their role in this. How does this impact on them? And then lastly, I'd say train again and set up your next training. So like I said earlier, I'm the animals guru, so I look after the animals policy. When people have a question around, hey, James, we're looking at this particular tour or this particular supplier, they do this, this, and this. Here's some pictures. Here's descriptions of the conditions of the animals there. These are the kinds of animals. It's things that I train on, and I always update my training. Okay, great. Next time, I'm going to make sure I have some information around if somebody wants to include, those little fish that are like on the spa, they're like spa fish, that sort of thing. Like trying to train and update your training and just keep going, because the more that you keep that to mind, both internally and externally, the more it'll be implemented. And if it's not understood, it won't be implemented, or if it's implemented, it won't be implemented well. So I think the more you train your people and your suppliers, the more you communicate within that group, the more effective it's going to be. Something we're still working on. Daniel, I've got an email for you after this call. So yeah, that's us. Happy to be industry representative here.
Brilliant, that's great. Thank you so much, James, for sharing that. Really, really useful and very interesting. So next we're going to hear from Megan, Dr. Megan Murakawa, and then we will come back to the group, I believe.
Thanks so much, Claire. Are you guys able to hear me? I see a green box around. Okay, great. So I want to emphasize probably my, again, thesis here is that vocabulary does matter, but I don't know that that's necessary. That should matter in meetings like these, and then we should translate that to the actions that we would like for the industry to catalyze, right? And I'll give you some examples on how that exists at Iberostar. So Iberostar is a Spanish-based luxury hospitality group. We've got over 100 properties in 16 countries, mostly in the Caribbean and Mediterranean, and a very ambitious and bold sustainability strategy that focuses on the ocean, that drives work from climate action to nature-based solutions to circular economy, destination stewardship, and a strong focus on sustainable seafood. And we've got a very large team that helps us to be able to implement all of the ambition and the quantitative goals that we have behind those focus areas. We're now about 35 people who come from all different sectors, whether that be PhDs in marine biology to folks who come to us from experience in supply chain, et cetera, to drive some of this strategy. And I bring up vocabulary because I can translate to you today 5 ways in which I think our organization is touching on biodiversity. I don't know that anyone in the organization would necessarily use this word as the primary example of how it is that our organization is impacting nature and biodiversity. And so see if we can walk through some of these examples to kind of evidence these interconnectivities. The first would be the word that most comes to mind of nature, right? And so the Iberostar Foundation has a focus on looking at vulnerable communities in our destinations, vulnerable in particular to the impacts of climate change, focusing on education and building community and looking at supporting research in any of these destinations. And so I bring nature into this component because this is where we do some of the research and support research, whether it be through our supported chairs at various universities, starting first in the Balearic Islands, now coming to the Dominican Republic to support just general research on marine biology. This is where in the Balearic Islands we're doing research on supporting an understanding of the impacts of blue crabs on local ecosystems and invasive species to the Mediterranean, right? So these are some examples of the ways in which our foundation is focusing on nature at Iberostar. The second component that I would bring in is through our supply chain. And this to us might speak more closely through regenerative food systems. And this probably is where our work on seafood is most strongly evidenced, where we have policies on, very strict policies on what we count as sustainable seafood, sustainably sourced seafood. We work very closely with the seafood industry to make sure that standards like GSSI benchmarked eco certifications that consider things like impact to biodiversity or stock health as part of precedents for receiving certification of products are met and held, and there's great transparency and traceability in our supply chain. So that's some examples of biodiversity impacts that are within our supply chain that we might speak about in regenerative food systems. A third example might be through negative impacts, and this is where the word pollution might come into play, right? A lot of these, how do we make sure that our business does not negatively impact the destinations where we are operating? We've got a lot of work on single-use plastics. We've been single-use plastics free since 2020, thinking very critically about how we don't look towards an uptick of using problematic plastic items and packaging, part of the Global Tourism Plastics Initiative, and others have focused now on waste management, on our objective to send no waste to landfill, and thinking very critically about how we work closely with local infrastructure on pushing forward our ability to do so at the scale of destinations, not just exporting our solutions or integrating them vertically within our own operations. So some impacts within biodiversity that might be related to what we talk about in pollution. The last two might sound more clear and are kind of probably areas where my team would most identify with some of this terminology. One has to do with the product, right? This might be where we think about wildlife or animals. These include business cases around ensuring that we have high quality of the product, like our beaches. And this is where we think about sargassum, and this is where we think about marine protected areas. And this is where we think about ensuring that the quality of the product is is something that not only through our direct services, but also our supply chain are present. This is where we do some of the work to make sure that we're protecting and communicating about endemic species within our properties. So that's kind of in the product side. And then the last of the 5 is through what I would call ecosystem services, which are the services that healthy and functioning biodiversity provide to our business. This might bring up words like biodiversity or ecosystem services. We think really critically about risk mitigation, nature-based carbon compensation. We have a commitment to compensate 500,000 metric tons of carbon by 2030 through protecting and restoring nature in our destinations. And we think very, very critically about protecting coastal ecosystems like coral reefs, seagrasses, mangroves, dunes that allow us to be able to reduce flooding, to increase our protection in extreme weather events, and linking that really to a core business case. So those are some examples of how different vocabularies might ring differently within the organization on how nature, biodiversity, ecosystem services, wildlife, pollution, supply chain might apply to what we do at Iberostar. Do I think sorting through this vocabulary and boosting education is a priority? Not necessarily. I think if we're able to identify some of the ways in which tourism can have its biggest impact and reducing threats or improving on biodiversity, then we can really focus in on building our understanding and kind of linking some of these concepts together. For us at Iberostar, this is most clearly seen through our work on ecosystem services and risk mitigation. We think this is, and have seen, this is the area where we've got the most traction within the business to speak all the way to CEO level of why we should care about nature. The others are much more difficult to build compelling cases around that get core to the business itself. That's our perspective, and we think that risk mitigation and ecosystem services are a really great way for us to kind of catalyze this discussion, but very happy to continue discussing on all of these other areas and the ways that nature, wildlife, biodiversity interact with tourism.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Megan. Yeah, thanks, James and Megan. There was some very strong messages that were coming across there, which I think we might touch on a little bit over the course of this meeting. Daniel, I'll hand over to you to continue the discussion.
Thank you, Megan. And thank you, James. So just this last slide for this session 1, just compares those elements, the drivers of biodiversity loss. You'll see the combination on the left-hand side with the orange, land and sea use, and that's the order of global impacts in relation to, well, according to the IPBES. So that's the kind of global view where land and sea use is having the greatest loss of biodiversity loss. So the greatest driver of biodiversity loss, and invasive alien species the least. The list you see on the right-hand side with pollution at the top is the order of the feedback received in relation to the consultation. So you've got pollution at the top as the driver of what people consider to be the biggest driver of biodiversity loss from a tourism perspective, with invasive alien species at the bottom. So from the previous contributions, do you think it's fair to say that the reason that there are differences in that list is due to pollution, etc., being most publicized issues, and perhaps things like invasive alien species and overharvesting least publicized, so were lower down the list? Or do people generally feel that the list on the right-hand side is how you know, from a travel and tourism perspective, indicating where the biggest drivers are? So just some thoughts on that. We're a little over time, but if I could have some general thoughts, that would be really useful. So do we go with list 1 on the left-hand side, or do we stick with list the list on the right-hand side with pollution at the top.
If I can jump in, I think that probably in the interest of time, what we've had is a consideration, many thoughts on why list 2 might be a little bit different, but I don't think probably there is a definitive list. I think we've had, some interesting comments here saying that perhaps invasive species deserves its, time in the daylight as well. So I think that whatever output comes out of this will reflect these comments that have come so far. So I think unless there's anything really pressing as a timekeeper here, I'm going to suggest that we move on to section 2.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So can we switch slide? So this session considers the actions of individual businesses as they seek to understand the nature that's around them and the consequences of their operations, and then also as they identify nature-based opportunities in their destination to build back nature. We considered 10 challenges, which are summarized here, that are reportedly preventing travel and tourism from applying and integrating a nature-positive approach, and the opportunities or solutions that can help travel and tourism overcome those challenges. So just as in part 1 of the consultation, consultees were asked to rank tourism's challenges and nature-related opportunities and provide further feedback where needed. And then this was followed by a request to rate 18 proposed nature-positive actions or initiatives by relevance, viability, and impact. And here we're starting to build more firmly a picture of where we might want to be heading going forward. And Daniel, over to you for the findings.
Thank you, Chris. So again, you've got the same format of the graphs, with the orange being those consultees affiliated with the travel and tourism industry, and the grey non-industry, and the blue is the average total of the two. So as you can see from all the challenges that we had identified through consultation with travel and tourism businesses in previous surveys, is that of the 10, the consultees felt that the biggest challenge was that businesses are not familiar with how to measure their risks and impacts. And then the second challenge was that businesses struggle to mainstream biodiversity or prioritize biodiversity within their internal discussions, their business priorities. There was a lack of incentive to adopt a nature positive action, was considered to be less of a challenge as far as celebrating nature positive action. There were differences in opinion between as far as the feedback was concerned, whether the commitment by the travel businesses was replicated in the destination. So there appears to be a disconnect between that commitment to nature positive tourism and its application in the destination. Any thoughts on those outcomes? Okay, so the overarching feedback from that section, talking about the challenges that travel and tourism businesses face, is that there is a general need for businesses to recognize nature investment. And in some cases, people felt that it is a mandatory requirement for businesses to do that. There was a recognition that nature positive tourism will only be delivered through an integrated approach. So not just from the tour operation perspective, but also including the supply chain, local communities, tour guides, and the travelers themselves. And that kind of reflects on what James was talking about earlier, as far as the need to educate and engage all elements of the travel and tourism delivery. And then lastly, travel and tourism should engage wherever possible local communities to help realize nature positive tourism, but also to ensure that their knowledge is utilized as part of that process. Did anyone have anything else that they wanted to add in relation to challenges to apply nature positive tourism?
We have a fairly long comment which I haven't been able to get through, read through, from Megan. Perhaps you'd like to share this. That's okay.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm a newcomer to these sessions, so I thought I would write down my comments. I'm happy to summarize if you would like. Yeah, I think the main one that I would want to share in this moment is the question of how to work in a public-private management program that would integrate travel and tourism business together with destination management. That is the focus of our work at Cornell. And without that, it will be very difficult, if not, I don't want to say impossible, but very difficult to have comprehensive results. So that's my comment.
Thanks, Megan. And actually, when we carried out our nature positive travel and tourism report, that also shone through as the key issue.
Great, because then we can work together on it.
Yeah, sounds like it. All right.
Okay.
Any other comments? For now, no. For now, no. So maybe we move to the next one. Right. So as with every section, we'll have some examples. And so to help us more fully understand the benefits of engaging frontline staff and local communities, I'd like to welcome a couple of speakers here. There's Miles Farnbank from the University of Cumbria, who's also co-author of the Adventure Travel Guide Standard. And we'll also have Francesca Mahoney, founder and director of Wild Survivors. And we will start with Miles.
Hi, everyone. So a lot of what I'm going to say is focused around perhaps the tour guide, but you could apply this to many other frontline staff, such as drivers, such as people working in hotels, people who the customers interact with. And it's something that travel companies could and are, but could do more in terms of broadening that educational piece so that the messages are coming across from all of the different people that the guests interact with at the destinations. But coming back to focusing on the tour guide, which is kind of, I've been a guide for most of my career and in recent years done a lot of training for travel and wildlife guides across the globe. And so this is a quote from a friend of mine. To be a guide, you've got to be an expert in lots of different things: wildlife, culture, history, politics, you name it. You have to be a diplomat, a nanny, a psychiatrist, a paramedic, a cheerleader. You've got to be all sorts of things. You've got to be superhuman. So clearly we need to, when our tour guides graduate and start leading touring guides for us, then we need to give them capes. If we can move on to the next slide, please. So to bear in a little bit more detail to this, then the tour guide, whether it be a wildlife guide or an adventure guide, is looking to provide safe but also challenging experiences. And challenge can be across a number of different aspects, emotional challenge as well as perhaps a physical element. The next one, please. This is becoming, I think, increasingly important. The idea of customer service. What does customer service look like in wild places? What does customer service look like when you're halfway up a mountain? And I think that customers are becoming much more discerning and their expectations around this. But customer service is something that I think in the tourism space, outside of perhaps hotels and restaurants, in terms of the delivery of nature-based tourism, there's a lot of work to be done here. What does a 5-star service look like in many of the environments in which these experiences are being delivered? Next one, please. So your brand, if you like, and that could be the company involved, or it could be the destination management organization, or even the country as a whole, if you want to think of it in that sense, is being represented by the tour guide in the way that they behave and the information they share and the values that they actually embody in the way that they work with their guests. Next one, please. And so here, clearly, this is what the focus of this work and the nature positive tourism is very much about the guide being an advocate for the communities, human communities, and also the non-human, the wildlife, the animal communities, the landscapes and seascapes. But as is talked about in aspects of the nature positive tourism documentation, we're also aspiring to our guests becoming advocates for the same things. And so this is something that, it has to be embodied on the behavior of the guide for that to work, but also the guide needs to have a lot of understanding and awareness and knowledge and skill in the way that they deliver that sort of thing. Next one, please. And if they are well trained and really recognize the potential that they have, then there is an opportunity for transformational experiences that are relational, that engage the emotions and that allow the customers to relate in a very deep and very personal way, which is far more likely to lead to their desire to be an advocate in whatever way that might manifest. Next one, please. So the guides have to be not only expert in their activity, whatever it might be, that might be a particular area of wildlife knowledge, or it might be a sea kayak guide, but they need to know and understand the destination, past, present, and future. Next one, please. And of course, they need to be flexible, fun, engaging, and spontaneous. Next one. Skilled in customer relations, communications, leadership, and marketing. So clearly, they really do deserve capes. And I guess the point of all of this, digging deep into the roles of what the tour guide is potentially being expected to be able to do, there requires a huge amount of training here. We cannot leave this to chance. Clearly, many skills, particularly in terms of some of the human interaction skills, are to some extent innate, people's personalities and just the way that they work. But many of the things that we would like a guide to be able to represent and share for nature positive tourism to really be manifest will require training, significant amounts of training, I would say, and ongoing training. Next one, please. So in my little brief intro there, the Adventure Travel Guide Standard was mentioned, and I just pop this up just purely as if we are recognizing the need for training, what should that training contain? What do we need to train our guides in? And there are clearly a number of elements here that don't relate directly to nature positive tourism, but particularly the first competency here, sustainability, is a key one. And I'd just like to give a public shout out of thank you to Daniel for helping me when we wrote the latest edition of this standard, because he was very instrumental in helping develop some of the content for animal and wildlife interactions in a tourism context. But then clearly the natural and cultural history interpretation side of things is an area where people need to have considerable amounts of training, and not just in terms of identifying things or knowing where to find them or whatever it might be. I would suggest that here we are looking at, do they understand the impacts that these ecosystems and the particular species perhaps that are in focus are facing? And there are so many ways that they can explore these sorts of stories, and that can include folklore and all sorts of things, and bringing in links to community, links to indigeneity and so on, where we start to allow customers to really kind of dive into a more relational aspect. They're not just seeing a particular bird and ticking it off their list and moving on. They're actually developing a relationship, which is far more likely to lead to, nature positive behavior and engagement on their part into the future. Okay, last one, please. So clearly, I was really pleased to hear James in one of his slides say training, training, and more training. And I absolutely, would stand by that. I think it's really important that we create training and that we also create more overarching standards that this training can be hung upon. There's lots of great training going on out there. But often it's on an individual guide training themselves, or it might be a business training their staff. But within this nature positive tourism space, I think, the idea of guidance and standards and, the training content that really will allow this focus on the broader sustainability, the local and global, and the reasons why, because clearly travel is increasingly under scrutiny for its impacts on the human and non-human communities, as well as the environments. And really, as customers become more and more discerning in the way they consume tourism offer, then it is essential both for the biodiversity and the destinations, but also for the future of the businesses, I would argue. Right? There's a strong business case here for the future of adventure and nature-based travel to really engage with this type of thing. And I guess to finish with, the training is essential. Training. Nature positive tourism cannot be left to chance. Those frontline staff will require support to be able to be advocates and facilitate advocacy. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Miles. That's true words. You've got an enthusiastic response here in the chat from James as well. And indeed, it's very much aligned also with one of the second key challenges that came out of our Nature Positive report, which is, well, we need to connect in destinations, but we also have this big thing. All these visitors that are purportedly ambassadors for nature, but that probably aren't in reality. What on earth can we do to leverage that potential? So thanks very much for that inspiring words. And next over to Francesca.
Hello, hi everybody. Thank you so much for this fantastic workshop and the consultation. It's been wonderful to be part of it. And thank you to Daniel and the team for the opportunity to present today and also represent our local community partners, their voices, their experiences, their views, which are so critical throughout this process. So just a very quick intro in the interest of time. I'm the director and founder of Wild Survivors. We're a UK registered charity. We're also registered in Tanzania, where all of our community-based conservation projects are run. Our ethos is very much about community welfare being at the heart of wildlife conservation. So everything being completely inextricably linked in that way. Next slide, please. So just to give you a very brief overview of how we achieve that, this is our sustainability wheel on the left-hand side. So all of these core themes form the foundations to all of our programs and projects, which always have the goal of being community run and managed. So they have self-sustainability as a key part of them. But all of these themes are completely linked. No one of them can be achieved without the other. And they all have a knock-on effect to each, from protecting habitat to educating and empowering women and young people, in turn alleviating poverty and uplifting rural communities. And where our goal is very much focused, it's on fostering coexistence between elephants and people. So our main issue that we hope to try and combat is actually the conflict between elephants and people, which is now the greatest threat facing elephants in many parts of their home ranges. So that's our focus, and we have to work directly, and we must work directly with local communities in achieving this, because they're very much at the core, at the center of conflict, and they're the only ones that hold the key to long-term survival for these elephants and for indeed their own welfare and livelihoods. So on the right, we have our partnership ecosystem. This is really key. We're very much a collaborative organization. We run our projects on the ground with communities who are bordering protected areas or wild habitat areas. And specifically in Tanzania, where we work, none of these are fenced, which is fantastic. And Tanzania very much leads the way in that way. These areas are open, elephants migrate between them. And obviously for travel and tourism, that's also one of the most incredible and magical things about Tanzania, is being able to travel through some of these wild protected areas that are actually outside of national parks. But this is where also the heart of the conflict lies. So we work with other organizations such as PAM's Foundation. We have our funders, an example here of the Elephant Crisis Fund. And then the other logo is our tourism partner, Nomad Tanzania. So they have been absolutely integral in supporting the programs. Their teams in camp and also in guides and support staff are majority employed from the same local communities upon which their camps are built within or next to. So they have a really wonderful approach to ensuring that all their efforts on the ground with the environment and protecting wildlife, as well as very much promoting the needs and welfare of local people. So that's how we partner in that style of ecosystem to achieve the project goals and ensure that local people are also at the heart of managing those and being supported by all stakeholders. And next slide, please. So I'm here really to focus in on community engagement being absolutely fundamental. We really value the local knowledge and experience and expertise of local communities. They have an enormous amount of historical knowledge that far sometimes outspans research that's been done in these areas, or the presence of other companies and other NGOs. So we like to understand the experiences of all local communities when it comes to changes in weather patterns, changing in livelihoods, new challenges that have been presented, and also how they've seen changes to the environment, changes to patterns in wildlife distribution, movement patterns. Specifically for us, it's elephants, but also buffalo and other key wildlife migratory species. And really recognizing the wider issues that these communities face, because we can't just pigeonhole ourselves into combating the issue of conflict with elephants, but it's how that has a knock-on effect onto their livelihoods, onto other cultural and social issues to do with healthcare, access to education. So we consider all of these, and I think it's really crucial for any project and any program that travel and tourism is involved in as well, that those wider needs are considered and everything can be consulted on with communities. There has been, and there are examples of gaps in funding and opportunities where there have been camps and lodges that have not perhaps made that effort to engage fully with local communities, and there's a disconnect that forms as a result. And communities often feel very much as though, you know, your wildlife from the national parks or from the protected areas where the camps are, your wildlife is allowed to come through onto our farms to eat and destroy our crops, to cause a lot of damage and loss of income, but we can't take our cattle onto your land, even though historically it was part of the same part of land for many Indigenous communities. So that's a disconnect there, and a misunderstanding as to how actually the two can come together. And it's really about land use and land use management and engaging communities in ways that land can be protected, but also to the benefit of tourism. And that funding then needs to be directed back into local communities for the development and sustainability of their livelihoods as well. So engaging community members and local government in initiatives that promote ecosystem services and crucially add value to those livelihood activities. Communities are really suffering as a result of changes to the climate and weather patterns changing. Planting for farmers has become really tricky. So oftentimes it means people have to respond by encroaching on further habitat land, by trying to cultivate more as a result of losing their current crops to wildlife or climate change. So I think there's a real opportunity there for travel and tourism companies to connect with these challenges and work together on how to help communities to recover from and become more resilient to these. Next slide, if I've got time. So just a very quick overview of how our programs have worked with communities. One of our biggest projects is on beehive fences, as elephants have a fear of bees, many of you might know. So these are community-run beehive fences. We do a lot of training in beekeeping. In fact, this is a great opportunity for lodges and camps to get involved, because they in turn end up purchasing the honey and wax products that these communities are producing. And that creates a self-sustaining program as well, where you've got income then coming back into the same project, so it can be maintained long-term with fence maintenance, repairs to beehives, etc. And we've seen a real decrease in crop rates as a result of the beehive fence, decrease in farmer expenditure on alternative methods that they used to use, tractors and fuel, etc., and a huge increase in farmer profit as a result. So it's a triple win, because the bees are also helping to pollinate the crops and boost the biodiversity of the highlands forest, which wraps around the Ngorongoro Crater, and the elephant corridor, which is critical to safe movement for the elephants and connectivity to other herds. And that really has come down to the community's efforts and commitment to this project that Nomad Tanzania, as our partners, have been involved in as a funder, and also providing logistics and support for us as project partners on the ground, and being one of the best customers for the honey products as well. So there's lots of different ways for tourism companies to get involved, as well as helping to support community members in training, whether it be the beekeepers training or opportunities in wildlife guiding and in tourism as well. Sorry, next slide, if I've got time. And finally, one other example of communities being at the core of these programs, again, coming back to the beekeeping element, was the result that we had introducing the beehive fence, whereby the women in the community became very interested in also developing skills in beekeeping. These ladies work incredibly hard to try and collect resources that their whole family depend on, and they must enter habitat areas like the elephant corridor to collect these resources, such as pruning trees, firewood, water collection. And often they are at the center of conflict with wildlife authorities as well, and sometimes within the tourism sector, because of course people want to protect these wild areas and these habitat areas, but equally you've got communities living alongside them who are dependent on those resources too. So it's about trying to build a common understanding of the importance of protecting this habitat, and for communities to feel the direct benefit of that. And beekeeping's been a key thing that's helped to advance these livelihoods and create financial independence for women, because the beehives are hung in the trees, on the boundary of the corridor, within the corridor, in the forest, and in an apiary, which you can see in the image here. And they've been fondly referred to as the trailblazers, because they've really set the path for other members and other women's groups in neighbouring communities to lead the way in forest-friendly livelihoods that also drive this additional income. So people have options. They don't have to cut as many trees. They can invest in other forms of fuel, such as, okay, it might not be renewable all the time if it's a gas cylinder, but also biogas that we're looking at as well. So this is all about promoting the protection of elephant corridors, wild habitat, but being supported and feeling that support from the stakeholders in the area who also depend on those wild habitat areas, especially the travel and tourism industry. Sorry, final slide, I think. I might have one more. So yeah, just to really highlight the bigger challenge, which is that biodiversity loss and the conflict that comes as a result of that between people and elephants and other wildlife is now one of the greatest threats that we face, alongside climate change, of course, which is driving these rural communities deeper into poverty. And that's placing even greater pressures on, of course, the environment, biodiversity around, and the people there. So there is a huge opportunity. There's, I think, for travel and tourism, there is a massive opportunity. And I've only seen a handful of examples of this happening in the field where we work, where you've got partnerships, strategic partnerships between this sector, local NGOs and communities to make informed decisions on conservation initiatives that involve everybody in that consultation process. I mean, ourselves, we've identified these hotspots across Tanzania where habitat really can be preserved and protected if communities are at the heart of that and can directly benefit from conservation. Thank you. I think I just had a very quick message to share from some of our ladies on the last slide. I think if the image is clicked. Oh, I'm not sure the audio is connected there. Bit of a delay, but these are just some of our women beekeepers, just to say that we're the Nali Women's Group and let's go together, Tuko Pamoja. So thank you, everybody, and sorry for overrunning, Daniel.
Thank you very much, Francesca. That was a fascinating example, and I think it combines a lot of the things that we've been talking about, the destination disconnect, but also an issue that came up, as Claire mentioned so strongly last time, this with local communities and indigenous groups. But really wonderful, inspiring example. I did not know that elephants were scared of bees, so I guess elephants are my son's spirit animal, probably. So yeah, that is also great food for thought. How can we, help, support, replicate, promote that type of initiative more widely, I suppose, is the question that comes out of that. Right, I'll hand over then to Daniel for looking at potential actions. And I think that actually what we've seen are actions. Daniel?
Thank you. Thank you to Miles and to Francesca. Obviously, both of those examples demonstrate the need for an integrated approach, both from overcoming the challenges, but also taking hold of the opportunities that are out there. And so as going back to the consultation and what we asked all the contributors to consider were 10 opportunities for travel and tourism to both minimize their impacts, but also maximize their outputs, their nature positive outputs. And so you can see all the different opportunities that we had listed that the different consultees had to mull over, the outcomes were not really conclusive. But I think the one thing that came through was the importance of seeking the private-public partnerships, and that was really showcased in Francesca's Wild Survivors case study there. Also supporting Indigenous rights as far as their livelihoods, but also consultation and engagement as far as delivering on the opportunities that are out there. There were differences in opinions, and those covered the appreciation of wildlife, the traveller's appreciation of wildlife, and whether that is important or not, as in an opportunity. The opportunity of biodiversity monitoring, and we will have a presentation on that later on, as in what the whether that opportunity for travel and tourism is a viable one. And then also looking at the sustainability of revenue streams in relation to protected and conserved areas, where travel and tourism sustains protected and conserved areas. And if travel and tourism is diminished for whatever reason, such as a pandemic, how those revenues can be sustained during that period. So those were some discrepancies, some differences in opinion. As far as the overall feedback on the opportunities side of things, there is a need for travel and tourism to focus on the same goals. There was a feeling that there was, between different businesses, they would decide on different opportunities. Some opportunities, some positive outputs were not relatable to the type of business or to the destinations that they were traveling to. So there was a consideration of a need to focus. There was a general consensus that we needed an integrated approach. And that's obviously very similar to the previous review on challenges, that we needed to include all elements of travel and tourism, from operation down to local community and engaging the traveller as well. Supply chain engagement, and there's a need, the importance of supply chain engagement, recognizing that supply chain has a significant impact on nature and biodiversity, and a need to filter nature positive suppliers, those suppliers that are aligned with nature positive ideals, from those that are not aligned with nature positive ideals. And then last of all, the importance of sharing examples of best practice was also considered very important to the consultees. Any further feedback that people wanted to share in relation to the opportunities for travel and tourism to build back biodiversity?
Or any further comments on the glowing feedback that we've had on the two examples we've had so far? Anything at all before we move on to the next examples? We have Miles. Hand up for Miles.
Hi, thanks. I guess I was just interested in the point that Daniel made there about highlighting nature positive tourism operations and calling out the ones that perhaps don't reach an agreed standard. And I think I can see the value in that, but there are some inherent challenges in calling out those organizations. And I guess probably my emphasis and the major focus would be on the positive side of it and promoting those that do. But at the same time, I do accept that finding a mechanism which would in itself be challenging to call out those organizations, I'm not sure quite what that would look like.
And that's basically that's what we've got to following this consultation and the workshop, we've got to gather together everybody's opinions, all the data that we've collected, and decide the best approach going forward. The discussions during this workshop will define those and help those along. But I think, as one option, recognizing that the supply chain currently really is not engaged in the whole nature positive tourism approach. Obviously, there are exceptions to that, but the vast majority, it hasn't really filtered down. One suggestion within our sort of series of opportunities was to create a supply auditing process, which already exists in relation to sustainability, animal welfare, health and safety. But obviously you could create, using the criteria that we have developed through this nature positive tourism approach with WTTC, etc., is that you could integrate those criteria within the existing programs for supply auditing to assess whether suppliers are meeting those criteria. So the process already exists, but the criteria and the nature positive tourism service in relation to suppliers does not. So that could be an opportunity going forward.
So that to be discussed a bit later on. Chrissy?
Yeah, hi. I wonder if there's also a little bit here around what the overarching aim, if you like, is. I think tourism's done quite a good job in the last sort of 5 years at defining itself an aim when it comes to climate change and carbon emissions specifically. So many of us are working towards the Glasgow Declaration of halving carbon emissions by 2030, and then further beyond. But if we were to, we talk about nature positive, but if we were to attribute a kind of overarching aim, how does that look when we try and break it down as individual tourism businesses? Again, coming back to what we were saying earlier, sometimes one person, half a person, less than that sometimes. What is it that we can all work towards to achieve and communicate as well very clearly and articulate it clearly to customers and other stakeholders that this is our thing? And I know we've got the 30 by 30, but even that can sometimes, from talking here from an internal business perspective, how does that translate into action when you're talking to suppliers on the ground? What is it they can put into action that helps us get to that target? And I'm not all about targets. I want action more than that. I know it's not all about targets, but just to galvanize people around a common goal, I guess.
So I think that question is super important. It's also a little bit it is what we're trying to get to with this meeting. And this section here is really thinking about, well, what is it that businesses need to do? What is it that you need to do for your own operations, right? But then as we move into, and this is all to feed thought for the last part of this meeting, which is about, okay, well, with all these individual business needs, what can we do as a collective? What is a message we can be putting out as a platform, as a collective? What is it travel and tourism as a sector can do beyond those individual business actions? How can we position ourselves and carry out this potential that we like to call ourselves, potential guardians of nature? So yeah, a great question. Yeah. We don't really have the answer yet. We're hoping to get some ideas what those answers, might look like over the course of the next hour and a bit.
That's exciting. It's exciting to see where that goes, definitely.
Yeah.
And I think it's also important to mention that we started this journey, I think this time last year, with a launch of the WTTC report on nature positive travel and tourism, which does set the scene, and it provides a roadmap of process from assessment through to collaboration and communication. So the framework, I think, is established, unless anyone disagrees with me, But obviously what we're trying to do from this process is flesh out that framework through a different range of voices and opinions.
Now we have two hands up. Javier?
Yeah, just a quick comment on travel advisors or travel agents that I think need to be also included in this conversation. So I just wanted to point that out because in our segment, I'm with Virtuoso, and especially in the luxury travel segment, they play a very key role in communicating and directing travelers to different places and different projects. So I think it's very important to keep them in mind in everything we do in all this conversation, not forget the travel agent that still has an influence.
Absolutely, and as we talk through our solutions, we do want to be thinking about the value chain. I mean, the tourism as a sector, not one particular industry type. That's for sure. Megan?
Yeah, just in terms of thinking about what a synthesis or kind of focus call to action is, in the case of nature positive tourism in particular, it strikes me that this is one that we might have two slightly different pathways that might diverge eventually, right? Around what might be an action that is scalable across our entire industry, or something that would allow us to kind of give alignment on everyone can start to do this, versus a second pathway which might just kind of need to be a subsegment of our sector, right? I'm sure that you guys have already seen, and even if you're fighting against a natural filter of people who want to contribute to this is what biodiversity and tourism should be focusing on together, there's sort of a natural subsection of travel and tourism that is going to be able to enter into these more complex but necessary discussions around various parts of the supply chain and its connection to destinations, not only through communities, but also through DMOs or mechanisms that allow for this kind of governance. And, on the other side of what can we get to scale across all areas, it might be really narrow, right? It might be so narrow what it is that we want to focus on that it might not feel like it's covering the entirety of nature positive. But I think that this heterogeneity in biodiversity action is also not unique to our sector. It's something that everyone is struggling with when trying to create goals around it. I think 30 by 30 is a great example, right? Like, look where protected areas showed up on a list of recognition and priorities. It's going to be really hard to coalesce actions that scale all the way up to net zero 1.5 degrees on the climate action side, which is where halving emissions by 2030 for the Glasgow Declaration came into the picture. So I think there may be a need to think really critically about, do we want to incrementally push as many groups as possible forward when it comes to nature positive tourism, or do we want to give really clear examples and recognize the subset of tourism that might be able to speak about this much, much, much more clearly and kind of come up with next step actions here, just to be able to prioritize action, but they might be slightly different paths that might be difficult for us to kind of pursue both at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And through all the consultations we've had, particularly for the nature positive roadmap, we realized that there was really a huge kind of range of awareness sets, or whatever the word might be, regarding biodiversity. Everyone senses that biodiversity is important, nature is important, but a lot, let's say, as the words I use, are fumbling in the dark, right? And what we at least want to do is start raising that awareness and that conversation around these issues, putting out information that orient those people. But we don't want to just settle for orienting people. We want to have more targeted action as well. And we would really, as a partnership, love to have a few actions that we can deliver that an individual business can't. What is it that where can we add value to this whole discussion? So I think those are extremely important points, Megan. Absolutely. I see that there have been several comments in the chat, but I haven't really been able to follow on those. But I think, Miles, you mentioned something about toolkits. We do have a toolkit with tools already available. And as for business examples, we are in parallel to this developing one now, which Dirk from UNWTO mentioned earlier. We will be launching in time for the UNWTO General Assembly. unless there are any comments that I have missed out on, someone want to raise their hand before we move on to the next part? And I'm not really sure how we're doing for time, Daniel, so I would just gently ask that we try to stick to our allotted time slots here. And right now we have, keep it more examples, basically here looking at how travel and tourism can collaborate with others to benefit both nature and people in the destination. This is carrying on from a theme that we've seen before. And for this, we have Michael Meyer, who's the co-chair of Lincoln Conservation and Tourism and a board member of Ecological Tourism in Europe. And we also have Che Greenidge, the executive director of the Barbados Environmental Conservation Trust. And we'll start with Michael. Michael, are you here with us?
Now it's better, I think, Chris. Yeah, thank you. Daniel asked me to give an insight, and actually it was a nice coincidence what Chrissy referred to, because I'm going into that right now. I had a business some time ago, a hotel and a restaurant, and I'm presenting some of the actions I have done during the running this business, and I hope it will contribute to this discussion right now. And first of all, I will give you some basic infos. So it is a hotel restaurant in the very center of a medieval town. The hotel has 15 beds and the restaurant has 55 seats inside and 75 seats outside. So, and because it's a small scale hotel restaurant, small scale business, there was one person doing actually the entire job. That was me. So the management, the purchase of anything you can imagine, the bookkeeping, marketing, cooking even, and the communication with the guests, and of course training of staff. Yeah. So this is, I think, one of the problems, the challenges small scale business are facing when they commit themselves to contributing to sustainability. What we call also as one aspect nature positive initiative right now. But at that time I was running that business, nature positive initiative was not on the platform. There was sustainability on the platform, and even sustainability was not communicated as a word to the clients. It was communicated in different ways. So I will go through this right now, and I will try to keep it as short as possible. So in-house, there were not many opportunities what I could do, because it was a building, or is still a building, under monument protection. So no photovoltaic or solar system, no isolation or insulation possible because of the standards for monument protection. But we had eco gas and eco electricity purchased for the building. So on the property, we had a garden, no pesticides, no fertilizers, local plants, especially herbs, were introduced. Beyond the property, there was a little river, and we made a cleanup at least 2 times a year, because guests were looking on that river, on the river banks, and we want to have it clean. The products we purchased were mostly local products, certified, seasonal, short delivery routes, of course, less waste, and I was able to establish a network of local suppliers. That was very important, and we had a lot of discussion how to improve ourselves back and forth. The staff was local, of course, very dedicated and trained to promote the philosophy I was carrying throughout this business case. Most important, of course, were the guests, and we gave them incentives actually to leave their car at home by a deduction of the overnight stay, for instance. Yeah, they got information about local recipes, yeah, authentic traditional local recipes, which they then cooked at home. That was a great achievement, actually. They also got contacts to our local suppliers, and especially they got information about the National Park Eifel, where this is located in. So all the information we had about the national park and nature protection, which is taking place in the close vicinity of this small scale business, was actually transported to our guests. That was the very positive side, and not so positive or even negative is I had a lot of colleagues at that time running hotels, running restaurants, cafes, bistros, and we had a discussion, of course. I'm still a member of the Hotel Association in Germany, and we had meetings, but no one was able to be convinced actually to run into the same direction. So this is maybe a challenge we can also further discuss here. At the end of this story, which took 4 years, we were able to be top 1 at TripAdvisor and Booking.com for the whole region. And we had about 80% returning guests. And I remember a discussion I had with Anna Pollock quite some time ago. How can we as people, me for instance, who is doing a job like sustainable tourism developments in and around protected areas, or doing a hotel and restaurant business, where do we have the most positive impact actually on the people we talk to? And if I count them in numbers, I realize actually that there's more impact if you run a local business, if you are able to convince your clients, your guests, actually in doing the same way what you do in your business, doing at home actually. If I would have continued with this business, I would have most probably be engaged much more in nature conservation around, having adopted maybe one of the Natura 2000 sites we have. Yeah, that's a European scale protection level. And of course, strengthened also the cooperation with the national park. So that's in a very small nutshell, Chris. I could talk for hours about this, but I hope it gives some contribution here to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. That is extremely helpful, and I think we have a lot of experience and what to draw on from you as we shape our ideas here going forward. Thanks so much. And I think that after that we have Che, I assume it's pronounced that way, Greenidge. I think you have some slides that you wish to share.
Yeah, I do. I do have a couple. I'm going to just share screen now. Give me one moment. Good morning, everyone. Greetings from very warm Barbados at this point. I'm going to just be sharing with you guys a little bit about what we've been doing. I want to say major thanks to Daniel for having us here today. Let's see. Oops. Okay. So it's a pleasure to be here with you guys today. I love the topic that we are discussing right now. This is a big part of BECT's direction moving forward. And so I just want to share with you a little bit about how we got to this place. So BECT is a registered charity in Barbados. And as you see here, we support local environmental initiatives. What we do in a nutshell is fundraise from corporate partners, from visitors on the island, people who simply love Barbados. And then we find the most impactful projects on the ground, and we support them financially to just amplify their impact and their work. So we've got a couple focus areas. This is who we are. We focus on, as you see on the screen, marine conservation, biodiversity, waste management. Local food is really growing within our project portfolio as well. But there's so many persons on the ground who are doing this work, and we wanted to be able to give them more support, because a lot of the times we found that they they don't have the structure, they don't meet the eligibility requirements for funding. And so BECT is kind of that middleman. And what does this have to do with travel and tourism? I'm going to tell you in a minute. So through our work, we've been able to see some great impact. We've only been around for a couple of years, but what we found in our interactions is that whether it's government agencies or ministries or different stakeholders, bring us all in the same room together. We call it bacchanal breaks out in the room, where we have the very passionate environmentalists and scientists in the same space as a hotelier. And then there just kind of seems to be this war in the room. And so relations tend to get a little bit strained. And so BECT, as that middleman, said, okay, well, how can we bring the two to work together? How can we bring a win-win to everyone and add value? And so this is where we started to move in the direction of travel and tourism and bringing it all together with the projects that we have on board. And so we've been reaching out to various hotels. We started reaching out to various hotels just to see what their environmental plan and strategy is. Barbados, as a very heavily dependent tourism destination, we know the hoteliers know that environment and nature plays a huge part. However, some are faster than others in this transition. So we have a couple partners on board who have made us their environmental partner. And I wanted to share with you guys today a little bit about what we have on board. So we started working with Sandals here on island, and we've also had a new relationship with the Marriott. Marriott Group has a number of hotels on island. Thanks to the team at Anna Mondial for helping us get connected with this team. And so we went in with the vision of, let's see where you guys are at. What's your plan? What's your strategy? And we're going to help support where we can. And the thing is, a lot of hotels actually do have a strategy and a plan. And this is why we didn't want to come in and just, be throwing ideas at them. We wanted to do environmental impact assessments, taking a look at their lighting infrastructure on their beachfront properties, just seeing where they're at first. What we've been able to do so far with our partnerships is have the commitment of, for example, the Marriott Group, with just transitioning out all of their lighting on their hotel beachfront properties for the sea turtle conservation efforts. We've been able to secure hotel signage across the Marriott network. For example, they've committed to doing this so that their hotels are and their guests are engaged and aware that when they're there to look out for these situations. Having our project team directly involved and intertwined with their work as well to give training sessions. We're calling these packages conservation vacations. I don't think that's a new term by any stretch of the imagination, but what we were really aiming to do is to see all these different projects here. How can we bring the tourist or the guest into our work? And how does that add value to our grantees, whether it's financially through tours that we're linking guests directly to tours at the Walker's Reserve, for example, to take a look at the plant species that we've been able to identify and go into the mangrove that we're restoring and protecting? Or is it a case where we have turtle watches with our grantee as well? We've just been looking for strategic ways that add value. I know I don't have a lot of time and there's a lot to share, but strategic ways to add value for the win-win. Another thing that we've been doing here, we have a DigiFish project with our local fishermen. And what we've been able to do there with the Marriott team is making sure, I heard persons talking about that supply chain, just making sure that, their fish at the restaurant is locally sourced. We have some upcoming events with this to highlight the, yes, locally sourced, but the fishermen and fisherwomen themselves at events. where we bring their stories out, because the thing about the environmental work is that we also want to remember that this is about people. And so we're just really happy with where we're going. I'm here to stick around for a couple more minutes if there are any questions, but I am feeling really positive about the direction that we're going. The appetite is there within the hotel sector in Barbados, and we're really happy to see that. We started with a few so that we have examples and we have the proof of concept, a sustainability framework that works, before we then take it to our larger hotel group in Barbados, which is the Barbados Hotel and Tourism Association. We are courting them right now, but we don't want to bite off more than we can chew at the moment. So we're working with a select few to show the others a successful path forward. And I hope that that is what you guys wanted me to share today. But that's just a little bit about Barbados Environmental Conservation Trust. Thanks so much for your time and for recognizing our work.
Thank you, Che. That was really great, and congratulations on the good work. And working with organizations like yours seems to be very much part of the solution of that destination connect and getting through the whole value chain, the supply chain, that support that is required there. So thanks so much. That's it for the presentations in this section. I think we'll just have Daniel summarize very briefly this section before we take a small break and then get back together for the last part. What do we do going forward? Daniel?
Thanks, Chris. Thank you, Che, and to Michael. As well as ranking the challenges and the opportunities as part of the consultation, we asked all the consultees to consider, I think there were about 18 different nature positive solutions. Some of them may be viable, some of them may not be, but we aligned those solutions next to the different challenges that we had identified through those consultations. The table in front of you lists the different solutions, that all of those solutions that were ranked the highest or considered the most viable, impactful, and relevant to what we want to succeed from this process. So you can see that right at the top was the importance of engaging local to national authorities to support nature positive tourism. Then there was the sharing of knowledge to support travel and tourism integration and collaboration across different entities, the private and the public and private partnerships that we were considering previously. The support of local and national conservation priorities, because of course, local to national governments will have their own priorities in relation to conservation, whether that's protecting threatened species or fragile habitats. Clearly, travel and tourism could have a role within that delivery, supporting those processes. There's a need for increasing the understanding of what nature positive tourism is, and promoting it and encouraging more travel and tourism businesses to commit to a nature positive future. And then lastly, the importance of applying nature positive tourism at all levels of the engagement and consulting local people. So you can see that in the next session, we will be talking about, in session 3, we will be talking about those solutions that the sector could do as a whole, as far as the Nature Positive Tourism Partnership and wider partners. But of course, here you've got listed some opportunities for individual businesses too. Does anyone have any comments that they would like to raise or points that they wanted to highlight? Okay. Moving on. The last slide in this section just consolidates all the feedback that we have received as far as the way forward to realize nature positive tourism. Everyone was reiterating the importance of good regulation system, supporting nature positive tourism, but also encouraging it. Everything from tax relief and incentives for the different companies, but also encouraging supply chains to meet this nature positive tourism approach. It requires, as we've been hearing from various people this afternoon, is that there's still a need to support and guide the industry. What is nature positive tourism? How does it apply to my business? What can I do that's simple and easy to apply? And what are the more long-term actions that I can take to integrate a nature positive approach? And these are, as Chris has said, these are elements that the Nature Positive Tourism Partnership will consider going forward as far as identifying its next steps. The need for collaboration was highlighted by a number of the speakers, and clearly a small business, a small SME business cannot do the same degree of output as a multinational. So the importance of collaboration is very clear. Nature positive products and services need to be identified over those that are not nature positive, and we need to think about ways in order to do that. And then ultimately, what are the actions that travel and tourism can take to restore and regenerate destinations? One of the comments earlier was about the Glasgow Declaration, and of course there's the regenerate pathway within that. So how can these initiatives merge to create a simple pathway for businesses to take? So I think that kind of sums up this session. And back to Chris.
All right, so I will suggest that unless there's any burning comments on this, let us all take a 8-minute break until 10 past the hour, and then reconvene and hopefully save our discussion for the juicy bit, the next steps. Any burning comments before we do that? All right, so break time. See you in 7 now.
Meeting. After we now looked at in part 1 and 2 priority actions for individual businesses, we want to look at the side beyond the obligations and actually focus on something which can be associated and shall be associated with the tourism sector. Its ability, because of the human-to-human interaction, which makes the tourism sector different to all the other business activities, to take leadership and actually act as an agent of change. We know the economic dimensions of the tourism sector, which are already by today quite significant and contributing to many jobs and a high portion of GDP, whether measured directly or including the induced contribution. And knowing that this this dimension will increase in the future even more, we wonder in this alliance how we can position the travel and tourism sector properly, if well managed, as an agent of positive change. And Daniel will present to us right now some of the replies you have provided through the consultation process to this question. Daniel, over to you.
I think one of the things that the consultees mostly wanted to relay as far as this question as to can travel and tourism be an agent of change, or as we have framed it in other correspondence, guardians of nature, is that consultees were very clear that I think before we look beyond and think about those overarching positive outputs as far as how travel and tourism can help society build back nature, is that the travel and tourism businesses, but wider, need to focus on reducing dependencies and impacts before those nature positive outputs. There was also the recognition, again, in this section of the consultation, that consultees felt that there is that disconnect between travel and tourism businesses stating that they're committed towards this, but then seeing not very many actions in the destinations. It was also clear that there are challenges in identifying those opportunities in destination. So that was the general feedback that we received from the consultation in relation to those greater positive outputs. And we've found some speakers that we would like to present to you that provide some additional insights for you to consider.
Thank you, Daniel, very much. And being familiar with the destination you are operating in is naturally very important, and especially to identify operational impacts and the nature-related opportunities to build back nature. So our next guest has taken the task further than most, and through a collaboration with regional government is developing nature-positive solutions through which other destinations can then use and follow. I would like to welcome Melvin Mack, the Executive Director of the Roads CoLab and Group Head of Sustainable Business Transformation of the TUI Group. Melvin, please.
Thank you. Thank you. Let me just see if I can share my screen here. Is that all right?
Melvin, I have your presentation added.
Oh, perfect. Okay, if you have it right there, then that's perfectly fine, and I'll just instruct you to move to the next slide if that's all right. But anyway, well, let me just kick it off. So first of all, hi everyone. I was in a bit late due to another meeting. Sorry for that. But thanks for all the great input so far, and very inspiring to listen to your work and your visions, and obviously also Daniel, thank you for inviting me for today's session. So whereas many of you, or all of you, we have been touching on the topic of biodiversity and nature positive over the previous presentations, I'm taking a slightly other approach to share with you, which is a public-private partnership, the Roads CoLab. So what we've done is we currently work together in collaboration with the South Aegean region, the municipality of Rhodes, and the Greek national government to transform Rhodes into a leading example of sustainable tourism for the future, or a sustainable business model for the future for the tourism industry. Developing solutions that fundamentally change or reshape the tourism business model on the island. And even though we are talking about a Roads CoLab here, obviously TUI works together with multiple destinations. So we're also aiming to use this as a blueprint for other destinations, despite the fact that there might be different local importance in several topics, right? So to just show you a bit of the complexity from where we come from and where we stand today, could we just move to the next slide there? And I do understand there's quite a lot of information on that next slide, and I don't want to go through all of that, but I just want to give you that overview of, let's say, the complexity of bringing up, or not so much bringing up, but setting up a public-private partnership in the size that we are aiming to do it now. So our first concept of back then, what we call a destination collab, was already delivered in April 21, and we've gone far behind that date today, obviously, and closely work together with several governmental authorities, institutes, as well as consultancies to really understand the, let's say, necessities of change in the broader sense of sustainable development, which obviously also includes, so you may want to argue, is also related, or very much related, to biodiversity in what we operate in the destination. But moreover, also very much we wanted to connect all of this into the existing regional government plans, the regional development plans, the policies that we see happening in Greece itself, as well as EU policies. So all of that is quite a, yeah, I would argue, a very complex collection of information and policies and frameworks that are existing, in which we kind of maneuver or have maneuvered ourselves into a strategy specifically now for the destination of roads, aiming to really transform one island based on their needs to transform it into this yeah, let's say next generation of tourism business models. So the establishment of the collab, and maybe we'd like to move to the next slide there. The establishment of the Roads Collab marks the beginning of a sustainability transformation with significance far beyond Greece. And it is the first project in the world in which a top destination, or a very developed tourism destination of this size is tackling its own transformation to more sustainability in such a comprehensive way, I would argue. And obviously many local stakeholders, many local partners, including the tourism industry, but not limited to that, will all be involved in further develop the actual projects and initiatives and the interventions that we install here. I will not go through the full strategy framework, because I think it is more the aim of the vision that we set up here and the concept of things. But I just wanted to give you a high-level understanding of the fact that we've introduced a three-pillar strategy, which is, like it is on screen, regenerate the natural environment. But we've also taken into consideration the social development, culture, and the economic side of things, which all leads us to the vision. If you just click one more, Daniel, I think it will turn up there. For roads to become the first global example of a holistic transformation of a destination, and then all of that based on the principles of sustainability. The next slide, again, it contains, maybe click twice so we see the full framework there. It has a lot of information. Again, I will not go through all of this now. I think if you click one more, Daniel, it will show the third pillar. There we go. Obviously, we have included there biodiversity as well, as you can see on the bottom left there. But you may want to argue that, you know, all of this operates within the planetary boundaries anyway, and in this case, within the boundaries of how we operate in roads altogether. But it is not limited to just naming that as biodiversity as it stands here in the strategy work. I think these slides will be shared with you afterwards, so please feel free to have another glimpse on that and reach out for any concrete questions or so. I just need to add one disclaimer based on this slide. Due to the wildfires we've seen back in July and August, there is a couple of topics that have now came up in discussions that we will probably include into a 2.0 framework as well. So even though we have quite a comprehensive framework, we also look upon it from a very flexible point of view. So if we consider we need changes, or we need to achieve anything sooner, or we need to change anything at all in the framework that we have, we do allow us to change that accordingly, and obviously not wait for, let's say, another 5 years to make those changes ahead of us. So I'll just pause it there. I think the concept of it is that we have quite a comprehensive collaboration of public entities, private businesses, and more private businesses to come in. We are very much advanced now with a partnership framework that we'd like to introduce in the coming months, which will also allow us to further expand the number of signatories to sign up for either being a partner in the CoLab in a general sense, or sign up for any of the applicable areas of interest. Thank you.
Thank you, Melvin. Very helpful to see an example as to where and how business can work with local to national governments to address biodiversity loss. In front of you is more feedback from the consultation. It's a little complex, so I'll describe it to you. So on the far column, the NP, nature positive actions, those are the solutions or actions in the ranking order that they were voted on by the consultees, with 30 by 30 IUCN initiative up at the top as far as what consultees felt was an opportunity, nature positive opportunity for travel and tourism. And then the eDNA measurement, so measuring biodiversity within a said location, was ranked the lowest as far as the nature positive actions. But when you compare it to the other column, the first column, those are the challenges that we've identified. So in the middle column, you've got the rankings. So the left number relates to the challenge ranking, and the right number relates to the actions number. A little bit complex, I know, but the thing I wanted to raise was that whilst measurement was considered as in measuring biodiversity, and the complex, the accessibility of that was considered the most important action for travel and tourism to do, recognizing that businesses need to assess their dependencies and impacts on nature. But the eDNA measurement, which is one, I believe, accessible way for travel and tourism businesses to do that, to understand the biodiversity or nature around them, was actually ranked the lowest as far as the actions. My gut on that is that maybe consultees didn't understand what eDNA was, but we do have a speaker coming up who can give that insight. Another key need, and as was highlighted by Melvin just now, the importance of engaging with regional or local, regional, national government, is to understand a little bit more about the destination. So obviously, if we've identified that there is a disconnect between the commitment of travel and tourism businesses to nature positive tourism and its implementation and rollout within the destination, then we need to find ways that travel and tourism businesses can easily access the information about the destination, the biodiversity in their destination, but equally, they need to be able to use that information in an effective way and build it into their actions going forward. So these, hopefully that's kind of, you can understand what's going on in the tables, in the table in front of you. But ultimately, we're trying to find actions that the Nature Positive Tourism Partnership can deliver either individually as individual representatives of travel and tourism, or in collaboration with other entities such as IUCN, such as creating an auditing, nature positive auditing process, such as making eDNA more accessible to travel and tourism businesses. Just wanted to invite any thoughts or reflections or comments on those outputs. Okay. So I think we can move on.
Thank you, Daniel, very much. I think our discussions already before in preparation of today showed that some of these things are maybe new, and because of that it's helpful that we are conducting this webinar here today. And so now understanding that the destination from a biological perspective is definitely a challenge for travel and tourism. Daniel just highlighted some of these facets, but there are tools out there existing, and WTTC's toolbox definitely provides a good basis of information what is out there available. We want to use also in today's webinar to shed light on some additional facets of that, as Daniel already pointed it out. So I welcome Lyndon Koppel, the Vice President of Sustainability and ESG at MSC Cruises, Professor Kelly Breaker, and the professor at the Arizona State University in the School of Community Resources and Development, and Swati Hingorani. That is correct, Daniel? That was confirmed? Perfect. So Swati is the global coordinator of the 30 by 30 initiatives of the IUCN Secretariat. Over to you.
Just to say that Lyndon Koppel can't make today's presentation, but we do have Benjamin Barker from Nature Metrics, who are working with MSC on this delivery. Benji, are you online?
Hi, Daniel. Hi, Dirk. I'm here. Yes.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'll jump in just to give you a quick flavor of sort of some of the work that we've been doing with the MSC Foundation. Just to introduce myself quickly, I'm the head of conservation at Nature Metrics. We work closely with lots of organizations globally, mainly NGOs, but also governments. And hopefully I'll show you also some links between the various objectives that sort of Daniel mentioned in terms of what the eDNA can provide in terms of data to really understand the biodiversity at a location, at a landscape, at a seascape. In this case, this was work with the MSC Foundation that started earlier this year, and I'll show you a little bit of the data today and just give you an understanding and an overview of why we set out to do this. Next slide, please. So the work started in the spring with the launch of a number of new cruise liners across the North Sea with the MSC group, with the idea of trying to capture biodiversity during these routes. So this was a great opportunity to really test out the technology in quite a complex environment. So we actually worked closely with the engineers and the staff of the MSC Cruises to deliver a methodology that could be used to collect eDNA samples. So very quickly, eDNA is DNA that is found in the environment, which stands for the E. A lot of the work that we do uses water as a great environment because it's a soup of eDNA. It collects biodiversity data for us. And by taking a scoop of water, we can actually sort of quite quickly tell what species are found in those locations. So the idea here really was to sort of pilot a new way collecting biodiversity data across the MSC cruise liners, and to really understand how we can start to support a regeneration, a preservation by sort of broadening the understanding and the knowledge of species in the North Sea. This could be sort of important IUCN red-listed species, understanding their distribution and their occurrence, and also understanding the spread of invasive species, which is more and more important on the sort of, and highlighted by Jeff recently as really a massive gap in terms of the data that is being collected globally. So there's opportunity here for those involved in the tourism industry to support with sort of data collection. And I'll show you then how you can make this data transparent and available for different causes. Next. So as you know, MSC is a family-owned company. They sort of are quite passionate about the seas, and they have a strong conservation commitment. And this really sort of what brought us together as part of a wider eBioAtlas program, which aims to work with the IUCN as well to support sort of an improved understanding of our seas, and in this case, in particular, the North Sea with the cruise lines that were selected for this pilot. Next. The idea is as much as possible to not only sort of build a database, but also to involve the public and wider stakeholder community in these exercises. So in this case, there has been great involvement and interest from the staff on the sort of MSC liners, from the engineers to the contracted staff. They are the ones collecting the samples in the sort of cooling chambers where the water goes through, and they have been very passionate about this and very excited to see the data. The second opportunity is for the public, the sort of tourists or whoever is involved and sort of running on the cruises, to show them the data, show this in real life as the cruise liners go across different areas of the North Sea, show them what biodiversity has been collected in these samples. Next. So this just takes us a step back. So biodiversity is incredibly, it's incredibly complex, and we know that measurement is a big issue. And as Daniel showed in sort of the hierarchy or sort of the selection process of what is most important, it's definitely something that we need to sort of get to grips with. And eDNA really is a way to make measurement as simple as possible, and to report back the biodiversity data that we find in a way that is comprehensive and can be used. So the next few slides, if we can just a few seconds each. These are sort of different taxonomic groups that we have targeted. These are the very small critters in the sea, phytoplankton, zooplankton. They can tell us a lot about the state of the seas, the ecosystem health, and we can monitor these through time to look at things like global warming and how really the smaller species are changing in these systems. Next, we have the fish. So fish are obviously very important in terms of both their commercial value, their migration, their and their sort of wider sort of understanding of these systems. So we will be monitoring fish throughout the voyages of these cruise liners. And lastly, the wider vertebrate community. So marine mammals are obviously very important. They're highly valued by tourists. So we will be monitoring the presence of marine values across some of these routes. Next. The idea is to then be able to help convert this sort of complex web of life into meaningful insights and understanding, and sort of make this as publicly available as possible. And this, I think, will be sort of a great point as, you know, like the TNFD is being launched today. Disclosure and transparency are going to become more and more important. And this is something really that, as part of this work with MSC, we have sort of been really keen to sort of develop the best practice here and the best way to do this, and sort of working together with GBIF and the IUCN to do this. So these are just some rapid examples. We'll be launching our platform in October, these are just some snippets of what it will look like to be able to track biodiversity across sites. So you can imagine, by using you know, cohorts of tourists all over the globe, how we can actually bring this data to life and sort of start feeding into some of those national targets as part of the global biodiversity framework. So here's where we can start tying the data that is, might be insightful for the tourism company and the tourist, but actually making it useful and usable by some of the governments in the countries where you are operating. Next. So our first point of contact to do this is going to be to make this data available through GBIF, which is the Global Biodiversity Information Facility. This is really a sort of an important first step, which is actually going to be a requirement for some of the sort of TNFD and the disclosure going forward. So we want to make sure that we support in terms of the requirements, but also a really important first step to be able to maximize the use of this data by the research community, by national governments, and by the IUCN to be able to, for example, update red lists and understand species changes in the future much more rapidly than with the tools they have now. So trying to put these hands into the tools of everyone and supporting in the nature positive journey of the company, but also of the governments and other countries involved. And I'll stop there because I know I only had 5 minutes. I might be 1 minute over, but thanks for the time.
Thanks so much, Benji. And I think it's important to mention that Nature is also working on soil as well, and a number of travel businesses are working with Nature in relation to terrestrial biodiversity. So there's lots of scope and lots of potential from SMEs through to the multinationals. So thanks again. I think, do we have Kelly online?
Yes, I'm here.
Great, so I'll stop sharing and that will allow you to share.
All right, wonderful. Well, good morning and good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to share just some background pictures to help enhance my discussion today in the 5 minutes that we have. So John Muir, a philosopher and conservationist from the US, once said that everybody needs beauty as well as bread, places to play in and pray in, where nature may heal and cheer and give strength to the body and soul alike. His sentiment from over 200 years ago has actually been supported through research today. The COVID-19 pandemic, as one example, has had global impacts on tourism, with the tourism numbers dramatically reduced, millions of jobs were lost, and progress made in equality and sustainable economic growth was rolled back. Widespread reports of dramatic changes to protected areas and conservation areas had negative visitation consequences for conservation, finances, tourism businesses, and the livelihoods of people who supply labor, goods, and services to tourists and tourism businesses around the world. Experiences from around the world on the impacts of COVID-19 and protected area tourism gave many an opportunity to consider how to build resilience within protected areas and using tourism as a regenerative tool. Looking forward, there's much talk of building back better for tourism. This should mean not returning to business as usual, of course, but planning forms of tourism that address climate change and biodiversity loss, and which are more inclusive, equitable, and integrated within sustainable development principles. So how can we learn from our experience with COVID-19 to ensure a more resilient and sustainable future and nature positive outcome? Nobody can predict how the pandemic will continue to evolve or the full recovery timeline, but stakeholders can identify plausible scenarios and create plans that work across various stakeholder groups. And our future directions need to build consensus on more sustainable pathways through best practice environmental management, and encourage visitors to be more respectful of people, wildlife, and the receiving environment. The UNWTO has developed a One Planet vision for responsible recovery, and this recovery might help achieve a more resilient and sustainable future that works for people and planet. Our collective experience with COVID-19 shows that resilience is fundamental to the sustainability of protected area tourism. Resilience in terms of tourism means safeguarding the health of visitors, local people, and staff, creating a more diverse income streams for local economies, greater attention to equity and inclusiveness, and better understanding of large-scale context for tourism globally, such as changes that are affecting the airline industry. Such challenges have to be set in the context of addressing climatic issues and economic disparities. We recommend that planning for tourism should become more holistic, inclusive, equitable, and adaptable, and focused on questions of what tourism can sustain. Many of the communities involved are particularly vulnerable to change because of the distances from markets and their dependence on natural resources for livelihoods. The way forward for tourism could have 5 dimensions: fostering openness to change with a willingness to embrace new ways of thinking and acting with respect to nature-positive outcomes. Developing a vision for nature-positive tourism, offering for the future, and protecting biodiversity for its importance to ecology of the area and people's dependency on tourism. Also recovering and rebuilding local livelihoods and the health of residents and visitors, and reframing tourism, including the resources it uses to achieve productive and healthy livelihoods without degrading the biodiversity upon which it depends. What we have learned from the pandemic experience reinforces time-tested principles and practices that have been developed over the years, such as those described in the IUCN Best Practice Guidelines on Sustainable Tourism. For example, federal agencies, the Park Service, Forest Service, Fish and Wildlife Service, have supported the adoption of visitor use management frameworks, focusing on managing visitor use to achieve the desired outcomes. The experience of the pandemic requires us to see how tourism can promote human health and well-being in destination communities, the health of ecosystems, and a deeper visitor experience. The pandemic has demonstrated that the most effective and resilient protected areas, particularly those experiencing increased visitation, had put in place robust management frameworks. Monitoring is essential, as has been mentioned, for professional management, and especially during turbulent times with quick decisions have to be made. Thank you.
So much, Ellie. Right, I'm going to share my screen again. Wait just a moment. Swati, are you with us?
Yes. Hi, everyone. Okay. Great, Daniel, I'll let you know when to move to the next slide. I'm just opening it up on my laptop as well. Okay, so hi, everyone. I'm Swati Hingorani. Thanks very much for having me here today. I work at the IUCN in the Protected and Conserved Areas team. My focus is IUCN's response to Target 3 of the Global Biodiversity Framework, and we've been having conversations with Daniel and his team to see if there is scope for the tourism agency to get involved with some of the work that IUCN is doing, or to see if some of the tools that we are advancing for governments can be adapted to and relevant to the tourism industry. So as all of you know, Target 3 of the Global Biodiversity Framework is calling on governments to protect 30% of lands, freshwaters, and oceans by 2030, which isn't a lot of time. And there's a real push to find a way to make this increase in protected areas be equitable. So there's a huge focus now on Indigenous territories and other forms of governance beyond protected areas, such as other effective conservation measures, where maybe the primary goal is in conservation, but it has to be one of the priorities. IUCN's response to Target 3 has two key components, and I'll go through both of them today. So the first one is Target 3 calls on parties to make sure that their current and any new protected areas added to their networks by 2030 are effective. And one of the ways that IUCN helps ensures that is through the IUCN Green List Standard, which has been mentioned in the new Global Biodiversity Framework as one of the mechanisms that governments should use in all their protected areas. And the conversation we've been having with Anne Mondial is, how can tourism agencies contribute to green list assessments for protected areas, or do we need to explore another way for tourism to be involved? So the Green List is a program of certification for protected and conserved areas to make sure that they are effectively managed and fairly governed. Can we go to the next slide, please? I think, Daniel, I'm just looking. Okay, it skipped a slide. That's totally fine. If you could go back, please. Okay, the slides are in slightly different order. Okay, so no, it's the slide before this with the 4 boxes. Yeah, right here. Okay, so what does effective mean in the context of conservation? It means that there is fair governance, and I'll get into what fair governance in a moment, that there is effective and adaptive management, that there is a focus on achieving conservation outcomes, and that it is adaptively managed, and that it is able to respond to global challenges, for example, climate change. We can go to the next slide, please. So what the Green List does is we work with protected area managers to understand where a park is alongside this standard. So we go through 4 criteria. So we look at whether local communities and Indigenous people were involved in the design of the park, whether they were involved in deciding how the area and its resources should be managed, and very critically, we focus on how they were engaged. Were they just informed of processes, or were they actually brought into the conversation? And this also looks at how other stakeholders in the area, such as tourism agencies, are involved in the management of the park. Criteria 2 looks at sound design and planning. So I heard quite a few of you talking about protecting biodiversity for tourism. This is where we really look into, are national parks designed to actually be in the right places for the right species, and are they able to achieve those objectives right from the design stage? And are they able to understand the threats and the challenges to the priorities of this site? This is another criteria where tourism comes in pretty heavily, both as an opportunity and as a risk factor. And we are keen to understand how site managers are actually working to minimize the negative impacts of tourism and increase positive impacts. Effective management is pretty straightforward, as the criteria title implies, but it looks at whether parks are able to actually manage for the needs of the area, the needs of local communities, and whether they are able to measure success. One of the indicators over here is relevant to tourism, which is on managing access to the area. So how are various stakeholders able to use and access the area under protection? And then, of course, since our objective is achieving conservation, we look at whether a park has achieved all of its conservation outcomes. So that can be protecting ecosystem services, it can be protecting a specific species, it can be protecting a cultural value. For example, a sacred site is an example of a cultural value. Go to the next slide. So the Green List works in a few different ways. We The purpose is to bring all protected areas globally to a global standard that can be assessed across all parks, irrespective of where they are. But the focus is on local implementation and evaluation. So a couple of weeks ago, I was in Belize, supporting the government with assessments of several marine national parks, and we had the chance to interact with local tourism agencies to understand how they were engaged in this process. So the focus is really on local implementation and evaluation and consultation with a wide range of stakeholders. And then I was happy to hear many of you mention IUCN, including some of our other tools. The Green List does bring together various IUCN tools, such as the Red List, Protected Planet, etc., into one place where we're able to really look at all the benefits of a single protected area. We can go to the next slide. So in addition to rolling out a global scaling up effort of the Green List, we are trying to get as many countries as possible to use the Green List over as many of the protected areas as possible. IUCN is also launching Act 30. So we are partnering with the International Indigenous Forum on Biodiversity to co-design and co-deliver a program of work that will provide technical support directly to governments on implementing Target 3 of the Global Biodiversity Framework. Our intent is that by co-designing with Indigenous people, we will be able to achieve the inclusiveness component of Target 3. And by bringing in the Green List, the IUCN tools, we will be able to achieve the effectiveness component of 30% under protection. We'll be launching in end 2023, so I will have more details by the end of the year. But essentially, the focus is going to be in year one, working directly with 15 governments to help them design roadmaps that are linked to funding for how they should implement Target 3. And the focus will be on having governments, Indigenous peoples, local communities, and other stakeholders to design those roadmaps together so that we're making sure that decisions about increasing a protected area network are made in consultation with the relevant stakeholders and people who are affected by it. And then a real focus of Act 30 will be on elevating diverse governance approaches. So we understand the need to look beyond traditional approaches of a protected area. Those are extremely relevant and important, and we will obviously be focusing on those, but we will also be working with our Indigenous partners to understand how their territories can be counted towards the GBF if they don't want to have a strict protected area, and also looking at approaches like other effective conservation measures or OECMs. Right now, there is a lot of scope to understand how different sectors can be involved in Act 30. So that's one of the conversations we've been having about where does a tourism agency fit within this, and how can we work with all of you. So I'm just keen to continue that conversation and to see where we take that. Thanks so much, Daniel.
Thank you very much, Swati, and thank you also to Benji and Kelly. So all of those speakers identified what I believe to be some really opportunistic outputs, nature positive outputs for the travel and tourism sector to get involved in. Obviously, some things like the eDNA activities are already being implemented by MSC Cruises, by Exodus Travel, etc. But there's clearly opportunity to go wider with that. And then as far as Kelly and Shawati's inputs, there's more discussions to be had. And as far as how we can realize the opportunities for travel and tourism within those global initiatives. So this slide just reflects on all of the feedback that we've received from the consultation, building on the fact that we recognize that destinations should recognize nature positive tourism and encourage it, however they feel that they can do that, and those are discussions going forward. That travel and tourism requires the ongoing support and guidance. That's been very clearly relayed by people on this workshop, but also wider. Nature positive tourism can support destination management and encourage the greater conservation of biodiversity and nature, as we've just heard from the Green List and eDNA and those other wider opportunities. Nature positive tourism must fully be integrated. If you remember at the session 2, we talked about the importance of engaging tour guides, which are often left out of these kind of discussions of integration, but also the supply chain and engaging with travelers and communities. And then how can we work with others outside of travel and tourism, but also within it, to ensure that travel and tourism becomes an agent of change? So that kind of delivers the overview of the consultation as far as everybody's feedback. Did anyone have anything else that they wanted to add at this stage before we conclude? Right, thank you. So I'll pass on back to Dirk.
Daniel, thank you very much, and thank you personally and your colleagues at Animondial for organizing today's meeting and the reach out to everybody and taking us through the meeting, which was very helpful for the little time we had in preparing for that, and at the same time condensing that in such a logical flow. I also wish on behalf of the partnership, the Nature and Tourism and Nature Positive Tourism Partnership, especially to reassure everybody that in this joint approach, which we have formed since last year's COP at the CVD, then we take this information, this guidance, and our analysis and research forward to action, to different fora, and especially important the lines of action towards the travel and tourism sector, where we try in policies and national tourism policies and to integrate the logics, or at least to promote the logics through the analysis and recommendations, but also to take that into the world of the national biodiversity reporting and explain over there the logics and the abilities of the tourism sector. As I mentioned right at the beginning, sorry for the big bang here in the back. As I mentioned, at COP13 already, we were able to position the travel and tourism sector as a positive agent of change if well managed, and that is always to be said in that connection as well. And this argument is an important argument, also explaining what tourism, what is different to the tourism sector's activity to other economic activities, and bridging over there then the commitment of the sector into this net positive logic into the agendas, on one hand national tourism policies, but also into the reporting of national biodiversity. So guidance and action, recommendations, these practical outputs are at the forefront of what we wish to produce, and supporting through that then the overall activities, especially important, as we mentioned right at the beginning, our next important element at the political level is the General Assembly of UNWTO in October in Uzbekistan, where this joint report of the World Travel and Tourism Council and SHA will be presented, and then later on also at the WTTC summit in November, two very important political platforms where to show this work is the next logical step, but at the same time quite a big achievement. The many best practices Daniel mentioned at the beginning, how we collected the practices, some 100 best practices will be then displayed also and to show and demonstrate the practical insights and link that from an action point of view to the overall objective of net positive. In that sense, there is nothing else to thank my colleague Chris Impson at WTTC and Glenn and Claire from the Sustainable Hospitality Alliance. Once again, also on behalf of Sofia Gutierrez, who is here with me from UNWTO today, for this very good collaboration. And we hope that we are producing through this joint initiative and the alignment of these important organizations, that this message is displayed at the right level and with the right necessary momentum for impact. Daniel, thank you again for the preparations, and everybody at Animondial. That's from my side, the closing remarks.
Thank you, Dirk. Did anyone have any last comments they wanted to share just before we close? Otherwise, thank you very much for your time today, and we will be circulating the slide deck and hopefully the recordings as well for your interest afterwards. Thanks so much, and thanks for coming.